The morning air was shattered by the deafening roar of helicopter blades. In a quiet neighborhood, where life moved at a slow, predictable pace, the sudden arrival of a sleek black helicopter was nothing short of a spectacle. It descended gracefully, kicking up dust as it touched down right in front of a modest house, the home of Thomas Jefferson Santos, a 45-year-old man who had spent most of his life invisible to the world. Inside, Thomas stood at the sink, washing dishes with the same quiet diligence that had carried him through decades of hardship. The sound of the helicopter didn't startle him. Instead, a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. He dried his hands, his expression calm, almost expectant. 20 years earlier, Thomas had been a young waiter at the Golden Fork, an upscale restaurant where the wealthy dined without ever noticing the hands that served them. He worked tirelessly, double shifts, early mornings, late nights, all to care for his ailing mother. Then, one cold December evening, 2 shivering children appeared at the restaurant's back door. Eli and Nana, orphans with nowhere to go, had been surviving on the streets. Thomas did what no one else would. Night after night, he smuggled food to them, risking his job, his only lifeline. But kindness has a way of being discovered. The restaurant manager, Robert Manning, a man who wore his prejudice like a badge of honor, caught Thomas in the act. The humiliation was public, the firing swift. "You should be grateful you even have a job," Manning sneered, ensuring Thomas would never work in a decent establishment again. Yet Thomas never stopped feeding those children. Even when he had nothing, he found a way. Until one day they vanished, taken by social services, lost to the system. Now, 2 decades later, as those helicopter doors opened and 2 elegant figures stepped out, Thomas knew. The past had finally come full circle. If you think this is just a story about revenge, think again. This is about justice, about how the smallest acts of kindness can ripple through time, returning when you least expect them. And if you want to see how a single act of compassion can rewrite destiny, stay with me, because the truth is more powerful than anything Robert Manning could have ever imagined. For years after losing his job at the Golden Fork, Thomas lived in the shadows, scrubbing floors, delivering flyers, taking whatever work he could find just to keep food on the table. The town had turned its back on him, thanks to Robert Manning's lies, but Thomas wasn't just a victim. He was something far more dangerous, a patient man with a sharp mind and a memory that never forgot an injustice. What Manning never knew, what no one knew, was that Thomas had a secret. Beneath the worn-out clothes and calloused hands was a graduate with top honors in business administration. He had taken the waiter's job, not because he lacked options, but because it gave him the flexibility to care for his mother. And while the world saw a broken man, Thomas was quietly gathering something far more valuable than pride. Every insult, every smirk, every time Manning and his wealthy friends laughed at him, Thomas stored it all away. He listened, he watched, and in the silence of his tiny apartment, he filled notebooks with names, dates, and damning details. Overpriced contracts, ghost employees, tax evasion schemes whispered between sips of expensive whiskey. The breaking point came the night he overheard Manning laughing with his friends on the private club's porch. "Look at that," Manning sneered, pointing at Thomas as he carried leftovers to feed the orphans. The thief waiter, still digging through trash like a stray dog. The laughter followed him down the street, but Thomas didn't turn around. He just tightened his grip on the food bag and kept walking. That night, he made a promise to himself. Manning thought he had won, but Thomas? He was just getting started. Meanwhile, Eli and Nana had vanished into the system, leaving Thomas with nothing but the memory of their hungry eyes. He tried to find them, but the doors were closed. No rights, no access. That was the moment his quiet anger turned into something else. A cold, calculated determination. For 2 years, Thomas worked in the darkness. By day, he was just another janitor, invisible as he cleaned the very offices where Manning's empire was built. By night, he pieced together the puzzle. Spreadsheets, recordings, documents left carelessly on desks. He wasn't just collecting evidence. He was building a weapon, and then fate intervened. At his mother's funeral, a man approached him. Dr. Marcus Chun, a tax lawyer who had known Thomas's mother years before. When Thomas showed him the notebooks, Chun's eyes widened. "This isn't just revenge," he said. "This is justice." Together, they refined the plan. Every document was verified, every recording transcribed, every loophole exploited. And as Manning's empire grew, so did the noose around his neck, woven strand by the man he dismissed as nothing. Little did Manning know, the quiet janitor mopping his floors wasn't just cleaning, he was waiting. And the wait was almost over. The first crack in Manning's empire came without warning. One ordinary Tuesday morning, his accountant burst into his office, face pale, hands trembling. "The IRS is here," he stammered. "They're asking for documents. The real documents." Manning barely looked up from his newspaper. "Give them the usual files. This is routine." But it wasn't routine, because the IRS wasn't asking questions, they were demanding answers. They had records Manning had never seen, copies of contracts that should have been shredded years ago, payment trails leading straight to offshore accounts. Someone had handed them a roadmap to his downfall. Across town, Thomas sat in a small cafe, stirring his coffee as the news played on the television overhead. Prominent restaurateur Robert Manning under federal investigation. He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The second blow landed days later. A front-page expose in the city's largest paper. Empire of Exploitation, the truth behind Manning's restaurants. The article laid bare everything: wage theft, racial discrimination, even audio clips of Manning laughing about teaching those people their place. Investors fled. Employees revolted. The health department raided his kitchens. Manning's world was crumbling, and he still didn't understand why. Then the phone rang. "Hello, boss." That voice. Calm, polite, familiar. Manning's blood ran cold. "Santos? 3 years ago you fired me for feeding hungry children," Thomas said quietly. "You told everyone I was a thief. You made sure I'd never work again. Tell me, Robert, how does it feel to be the one who's invisible now?" The line went dead just as Manning's assistant rushed in. "Sir, the TV station's just received an anonymous package. It's more recordings, and the board is demanding an emergency meeting." Manning didn't hear the rest. He was too busy staring at the chaos unfolding outside his window. Reporters, protesters, former employees holding signs that read, "We deserve better." All because he'd underestimated a waiter. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't celebrating. He was in a modest office, reviewing plans with Dr. Chun. "The foundation's paperwork is finalized," Chun said, sliding a folder across the desk. "We start helping families next month." Thomas nodded. This was never just about revenge. It was about building something that would outlast Manning's shame. Little did he know, the final twist was still to come. And it would arrive not with a lawsuit or a scandal, but with the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the sky once more. The helicopter's arrival this time carried none of the shock of the first. Thomas stood waiting on the rooftop helipad, the wind whipping at his tailored suit. 20 years of patience had led to this moment. As the rotors slowed, two figures emerged. But these weren't the polished executives who had come before. The man, now broad-shouldered, with the confident bearing of someone who commanded respect, extended his hand. "Mr. Santos," Eli said, his voice thick with emotion, "we've been looking for you for a long time." Beside him, Nina clutched a worn manila envelope. "We made a promise to ourselves when they took us away. We'd find the man who taught us that kindness could survive in this world." What followed wasn't the reunion Thomas had imagined during those long nights cleaning offices. Eli wasn't just successful. He'd built a restaurant empire of his own, one that deliberately hired the overlooked and underprivileged. Nina had become a powerhouse attorney, specializing in workplace discrimination cases. "We want you to meet someone," Nina said, gesturing to the helicopter. A small boy, no older than 8, stepped out nervously. "This is Isaiah, our first scholarship recipient at the foundation we created in your honor." Thomas felt the world tilt beneath his feet. While he'd been meticulously dismantling Manning's life, the children he'd saved had been building monuments to hope. Down in the city streets, Robert Manning sat in a dingy diner, staring at the newspaper headline, "Santos Lenina Foundation opens third youth center." The photo showed Thomas flanked by his 2 protégés, the very orphans Manning had mocked. His hands shook as he poured sugar into bitter coffee, the clatter of the spoon the only sound in his empty world. The waiter, who'd once brought him steak, now controlled a philanthropic empire. The janitor who'd cleaned his offices had become the most sought-after ethics consultant in the country. And the children he'd dismissed as street rats? They'd grown into forces of change. As Thomas knelt to eye level with Isaiah, showing him the skyline from their vantage point, he understood the true power of his revenge. It wasn't in Manning's downfall. It was in this moment, this legacy, this unbroken chain of kindness stretching across generations. As Thomas walked Isaiah to the edge of the rooftop, the city stretched before them, a living testament to how far they'd all come. But then Eli pulled out his phone, his expression turning serious. "There's one last thing you need to see." The screen showed a live newsfeed. Robert Manning, gaunt and hollow-eyed, stood outside a homeless shelter, holding a tray of food. The headline read, "Disgraced millionaire serves meals at shelter founded by man he once fired." Thomas stared, stunned. Manning, now bankrupt and alone, was volunteering at his foundation's flagship shelter. The irony was almost poetic. Nana placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "He applied to work here last week. The board voted unanimously to reject him. But then Isaiah here had another idea." The boy looked up, eyes bright. "I said, maybe he should get the same chance you gave us." Thomas felt the weight of those words. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even pity. It was something far more powerful. The choice to break the cycle. That night, as Thomas stood at the shelter's window watching Manning ladle soup with shaking hands, he realized the true victory wasn't in the fall of an empire, but in the chance to rewrite its ending. And if you think this story is over, think again. Because in 2 weeks, Manning will make a discovery in that soup kitchen that will shock even Thomas. The circle isn't closed. It's just beginning. Hit subscribe, because the final chapter of this incredible story is coming, and you won't believe how it ends.